Hello, welcome back to Emperor's Path. My name is SBJ and today I am doing a weathering video for you. Today we're going to be doing a weathering video, weathering some of my DMUs. If you haven't seen it already, I have done previous videos on weathering in various stages, and in this one I am specifically covering the oil weathering version for doing it on coaches and the like. So hopefully you like this video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to myself in the past whilst I was weathering all of these locos ready for today, and I'll see you guys at the end of this video. Okay, so here is what we're going to be working on today. We've got the Class 121 Bubblecar and we've got the Class 108 by Bachmann. So this is a Hornby, I believe it's a railroad version which somebody has jazzed up in the past, and then we've got the Bachmann Class 108. Now this has been weathered to a certain degree, but it's a little bit too clean still for my liking. The bogies and all of the sort of underframe has all been weathered, but I think it needs some panel oiling so that we can pick out those details a lot better. It's not a bad job, it's just not what I'm after. And then this is pristine at the moment, so we're going to go to town on this one. So the tools that you're going to need for today, let's have a look. So if you haven't already, there is a video up here which you can look at, which is my previous oil weathering video where I go over how to weather with oils, but this is a newer one with a sole focus on the train stuff. So the most important thing that you're going to be needing today to make everything better is Artist White Spirit, and this is by Winsor & Newton. So the thing that you're going to need today, let's start with what I consider the most important one, is this Artist White Spirit by Winsor & Newton. See if it will focus. Now I have a massive container of this which is hidden under my desk. This was an old bottle that I basically fill up so that I don't have to keep getting the big container out. It has been dyed slightly, the bottle has been dyed slightly, but the liquid inside is completely clean. Then you're going to need your oil paints. Now for me, my recommendation is, this is the trifecta of colours that make weathering amazing. So you've got Raw Umber by Winsor & Newton, you've got Burnt Umber, and you've got Burnt Sienna. Now there's one that I've added in within the last 6 months to my weathering which I quite like, because it adds a really subtle tone that you don't notice straight off the bat. You don't look at it and see that it is purple, but what it does is when the oranges and the browns blend together and they blend a little bit with that purple, you get this fantastic little colour that looks like grime, and you know it's purple, but you can't fathom how. Occasionally I do tend to use the Winsor & Newton Black. The problem I have found with it is that it is a very overpowering colour when you're trying to oil weather, so I've kind of steered away from it recently. Now there are various different thought processes on how you do your weathering when you're doing your cars. Me personally, I do it however I feel best at doing it at the time. You can take the body shells off, you can leave them on. It is a complete personal preference. I find it is easier to hold if you take the body shells off, so that's what we're going to be doing today. The other things you're going to need are your oil paintbrushes, which are here. You are going to need milk lids. If you've seen my video previously, I think milk lids are extremely important because they are so much easier that when you're done with them you can throw them away or you can wash them out and reuse them, and they save you having to have a massive mixing palette. The reason I only have two is because what I do is I put the colours in the same palette and help them mix up a little bit, so whilst there are browns and purples and oranges, they all mix together and all of the tones that you will see are subtle. I think the only one that's really obvious when you see it is the orange one, which is why we blend a lot of it in. Now, once again, if you've seen my previous video, I do have a pre-mixed bottle of white spirit and raw umber. That's because I use so much of it that I just make a batch up to use. It's a lot thinner than I would usually use, so what I tend to do is I pour a little bit of this in the milk lids, and then I add a little bit more paint if I need to. But basically this saves me having to dirty the white spirit that I've got. The other thing I'm going to need is cotton buds, and actually, as I'm about to start this video, I've run out. So I'm going to pop to the shop and get some cotton buds in a second. They are not essential for the first part, so if you want to do this first part and then go pop to the shops and get your cotton buds, that is absolutely fine as well. But yeah, we're going to get started with this. I'm going to remove the body shells and we're going to come back to the desk. Okay, so I couldn't get the chassis off. This one, I can't take the chassis off because the lights that were previously put in here have been hardwired in. So I can't take that off sensibly, so I'm just going to leave it on here. As I say, it's not a problem. I don't always do it anyway, but in this, my hand has been forced. And on this one, I just couldn't get it off. Yeah, for the life of me, cannot remember how to get it off. But once again, it's not a problem. These are going to be weathered anyway, and all it means is that any oil paints that we get on the lower parts just need to be cleaned up with the airbrush later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the process on the 121. So let's get these out. Now, I did also forget to mention that you do need kitchen roll for this, mainly because it makes your life a lot easier. I'm going to pour some of that in there. So there's my brown mix that we talked about. That is a 60% mixture of the raw umber and then a dash of the burnt sienna in there, just so it gives me an orange tone overall. Now, let's apply this and see how it sits, because I don't want it to be too runny, but at the same time I don't want it to be a case that we're putting on paste. Now, this is a terrible brush, that's dried out too much, so let's go to our next Old Faithful. So this actually looks like a pretty good mix. So the reason I'm doing the roof first is because anything that you do to the roof can then just go down and filter down. Now there are ways of doing this where you basically just do the parts that you want to pick out, so almost like line washing, which is fine, you can do that. The reason I like doing it in this method, where yes, I do go for the lines, but I also like to put additional bits of oil paints on top, is because it does give you that streaking on the side panels that you don't necessarily always get by doing just the lines. So all I'm doing at the moment is, funnily enough, I am just filling in the lines and the details on the top. I want to make sure that this brown is going in all those recesses before I start adding a little bit more thicker paint. And all it's doing is basically cementing what I want to do on the roof. It lets me know how it all sits. And because I'm using this sort of thinner medium of it, you can get a little bit of an understanding of where you want the detail to go. So for example, you've got the lines on the roof here, which you don't have on the Bachmann ones. So you want to make sure that you get lots of dirt and grime in there, because that's the sort of stuff that gets in there and doesn't get cleaned for years and years and years. So let's put, I'm going to put a little bit of raw umber into the mix. What I do is I just put it onto the side, and as I said, I do mix colours in. So what I'm going to do is just add a little bit to it. I don't want to make it too bad, but I want to make it enough that now when I put it on there, so you can see where that previous mix was a mixture of the orange and the raw umber, you can now see the colour differences by putting on that darker brown in its purest form. Now this is where you could put black on, and if you put the black on, you'll get some really nice dark tones. The problem is when you then go over with the white spirit, you can often get it where it just spreads the black all over the top, which isn't necessarily always what you want. If you were just solely using black, absolutely fine. It's completely fine. But you're losing some of those delightful little tones that you can get in. Sorry, I'm trying to make myself sound like Bob Ross apparently. But yeah, you can lose some of those tones that you're getting in there. And what I'm doing, I'm not attacking every area with this darker brown. I'm just putting it on where I want. And what I am going to do is I'm going to go and add a little bit more orange. Now that mid brown is something that I tend to use as like a, not highlight, highlight's the wrong word, but as a, I tend to splodge it on once I've done the initial bit, and it basically just lightens up certain areas. And all I'm doing with this orange is I'm just picking out a few little recesses that I'm putting it on. So when you start streaking down those paints later on, it's gonna give you some nice little pops of orange on there. So I'm being quite reserved here. This isn't usually how I do it. What I usually do is I just slather on, but I'm trying to just put this on here because I want to explain whilst I'm doing it. Usually I'd put a time lapse on here and just go to town on it, but I'm wanting to explain it. So what you can do is you can do a section at a time, which is absolutely fine. Me personally, I like to work in the sense that you have enough time that you can do this, let the white spirit from the oil paints evaporate a little bit, and then you can come back to it and you can do all of it in one go. And that's what I'm going to do today. So I know I haven't done the other side, so I can lay this down now so it'll give you a nice view. So this is where we're gonna, once again, now I am not worried about the windows in the slightest. I've done it before on plenty of weathering where all you do, there you go, you can get that nice orange tone there. You can use a cotton bud and just pure white spirit and it cleans the windows up fine. So I've had people say, oh, why don't you remove the windows and things like that? And it's simply because there's no need. Not in this instance anyway. If I was repainting it, I'd be removing the windows because taping and masking up windows is an absolute pain. So at this point, where I've got that grey there, it's a nice light colour that will show up things a little bit more, so it will show the tonal differences. So I'm going to use a little bit of the burnt umber. It's not an essential colour, like it's one of those things that you won't see pure burnt umber on this finished product, but you will see different tonal changes, and it's really good. Now I call it my secret ingredient, but I add a little bit of purple, and the reason for that is same thing as the previous colour, where you get just a slight tonal change. You're not going to see a pure purple or anything like that there, and especially on that grey, well, and the blue as well, a little bit of purple here and there. When you start, it looks horrific at the moment, but when you start adding the white spirit and start streaking it all down, it's one of those colours that you go, oh, I can see a little bit of purple there, but I can't see purple, and it's just a nice little tonal change. My friend Dan from Out of the Frying Pan podcast, he said about using purple when I was doing oil paints on my Alpha Legion, because it created that nice little tonal difference. So if you want to thank someone for it, Dan's your man. Cool. Right, so all I'm doing at the moment is I'm just using different colours, dipping my brush into the white spirit mix and just adding a little bit of colour. And it honestly doesn't matter really how thick you put this on. Like, I have had it where I've almost painted the oil paints on with a dash of white spirit. You can see that there's a lot of orange in that colour now, so I'm going to try and use my raw umber to bring the tone down a little bit, because I don't want it to be too orange, but at the same time I don't have to paint the whole thing. I can just put a small dab of the paint in there and just bring it over. Now you can as you're doing this. You can just start your downward stroke motion now if you really want. Me personally, I like to let it dry a little bit. It depends on how dirty you want this to be. I like the paint to cling to all of the recesses, so I let it dry a little bit. Let's put a little bit, I think I put loads down here. I'm going to put a little bit of purple down here. I say you don't have to make it anything drastic. And it's a shame, the black would work really well here, and it sounds like I'm harping on about it a little bit, but it just dominates too much of the model when you start adding the white spirit. Like, it spreads so easily, in which case makes it quite a good paint really. But yeah, so that's our side. So what I am going to do now, I've talked you through a little bit of this. I'm going to do the yellow ends, I'm going to do the other side, and this one's going to be ready to just sit and wait. So we're going to time lapse this, and I'll come back to you guys in a sec. Okay, so we finished painting this 1-2-1 with the oil paints, and you can already see where the oil has started to streak, it's started to run, and it's starting to evaporate, which is what we want. We only need a couple of hours before we can start attacking this. I don't know if the camera's picking it up anywhere near as well, but I will put pictures up at the very end of the finished product anyway. But I can already see where we've got the darker browns here, there's a slightly lighter brown here, there's some orange there, and that's a really beautiful thing to see, because when we start attacking it with the brushes and the cotton buds, we're going to be streaking down. So you basically start at the top, and you just start streaking down. You go down, 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 down. Never do an upward stroke. You always make sure that your streaks with your brush or your cotton bud are always going the direction of the ground, the way gravity would intend it to go. The reason for that is because the second you brush up, you're ruining everything that you've already started to do. So you just go down, 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 lift, down, lift, down, lift. Obviously, I'm doing it very quickly when I'm doing it, but I can see. Now, this is the stage that if you post this on Instagram, people who don't use oil paints get scared. They go, what are you doing? You're ruining your model. And it's very easy to see why people would think that, because it looks like you've ruined your model. But it's a process, you trust the process. Big, massive thank you to Hobby Sensei Stu from Miniature Realm Studios. He was my painting teacher. Back in the day, he taught me how to use an airbrush properly, how to blend colours, and he taught me how to do oil weathering and stuff like that. I've just taken it to the nth degree where I do an entire model like this. So yeah, so I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to get the Network Southeast one all weathered up as well, because the colour configuration is different. I will apply the oil paints in a slightly different way so that it benefits the colour, whereas obviously we have the grey here on the BR1 and the blue here. We've got the blue here and the white here. So I will try to add the darker colours where the blue is, and I will add some of the more eccentric colours where the white is, so you can actually see them more. That's not saying, that's saying that there'll be a lot more purple in the blue area and a lot more of the mid-brown possibly in the whiter areas and the red. Because I can't get a good camera angle on it, and whilst I was doing it quickly, I just wanted to say that when you're doing the yellow sections on the end, orange benefits those sections really well, because they're the parts where they're just facing the elements, charging down the tracks and stuff like that, and you can get a lot of areas where there's a lot of rust and things like that. So being able to put a bit more orange on that section's fine. You can use browns, whatever. As I say, play with colours. You just almost dot them on and look at how the colours sit there. If you have too much orange, you'll see that there's a blob of orange, whereas you kind of want it to be that you almost amalgamate the colours, sort of like we've got on the roof here. So let's get that painted up and we'll come back to you in a sec. Just whilst I'm starting working on the Network Southeast one, I did want to talk about other little bits quickly as I'm starting this, in the sense that the what I tend to do is, so I'm using Artist White Spirit. Now that's nowhere near as smelly, fumey as the traditional white spirit. I've not used a traditional white spirit simply because of the smell, and I'm usually doing this all inside. I'm sure you can use it. I'd recommend if you are doing it, please make sure that you wear a mask. With the Artist White Spirit, I don't tend to wear a mask. I don't feel like I need to, because it's a lot cleaner smelling. Also, what I do is I've put the 121 on the office window at the moment. It's sat on an old piece of board so that any of the oil paint drip off. It doesn't go onto my windowsill, it goes onto the board. And I've just opened the window a little bit so that the air helps the white spirit to evaporate, or the evaporation process has somewhere to go. So yeah, I'm going to crack on with this. Okay, so that's the locos all on the windowsill. They're all airing out. I'll leave those for a couple of hours and then I'll come back to them and do some weathering with you guys. Whilst I'm waiting for that, I am going to go out and get some cotton buds to make sure that I can actually weather them properly. You can do it with a brush, but I like to go between brush and cotton bud. So we'll leave those for a few hours and we'll be back. Okay, so we've left it a few hours. I'm going to bring the models back. I have gone and got these, the Johnson baby cotton buds. These are plastic free and recyclable, so they are good for the environment, I guess, or they're better than the plastic ones. As I said, also kitchen towel is also handy. I have a few different brushes that I use for doing the whitewash section of this video. And yeah, I'm going to crack on. I'm going to start with the Network Southeast one. Now, little disclaimer, if you like things heavily weathered, you do less than what I'm doing. If you like things very clean, but you want some sort of little grime on there, you can strip it all away. I tend to err on the side of dirtier for me. That's how I like my models. But it's down to a personal preference thing. I think this looks good enough that the carriage washes have missed sections of the vehicle, but at the same time there's still a cleanliness to it. You may see the occasional streak or things like that, and a lot of the ridges and cracks and crevices will have all of that grime in there as well. So let's crack on. I'm going to speed this part up. I'll see you in a sec. I'm just quickly stopping the video here because I wanted to sort of talk about what I've just done in this section. Now, you will have noticed that I will have used the white spirit, dipped it in with the brush, and I will be going on the areas where the bobbles on the top of this coach aren't. So I've been cleaning the main area of it. I have used the brush on this area, but I've always made sure that there's no white spirit on there, or there's a little of it. The reason for this is because all of the dirt and grime that gathers around these, when it rains, all of that dirt and grime runs down, causing these lines here. So what I'm doing is I'm cleaning the roof a little bit, and then I'm slowly working away on this center part and still leaving grime and dirt. But then when it comes to these little knoblets, I don't actually know what they are. I assume they're vents for the coaches. It means that I can come in here and then with a slightly drier brush, not a very dry brush or a very wet brush, I can stroke down and not get rid of anywhere near as much of the paint. And that will give me some nice dirt streaks. Now, once again, I don't want to, me personally, I don't want to completely get rid of it. You may want to add a little bit more white spirit to make it a lot more faint. You may want to have a completely dry brush when you're doing this to make the roof look very bad. On my local heritage railway, the Watercress line, I've seen some coaches where they are filthy on the roof, but some of the other ones are extremely clean. So there are different examples out there. If something's been for a coach wash, the roof will have been touched, but once again, it will have been washed. Certain parts won't have been grabbed or rinsed, for example, so the wet gathers around, and then whilst it comes out of the coach wash, it then starts to dry, but that grime then starts running down. So that's why the roofs are a little bit more dirty. But yeah, I like to work on the roof first, simply because you're working down the model. I may come back to it, I may add some more grime, I may take a little bit more off, I'll come back with a cotton bud later as well. But I will take away all of this to a level that I am happy with. Once I've done the roof, I then move on to the sides. Once I've done the two sides, I then move to the front. And then this part at the back here, I sort of do, but it's A, black, and two, very filthy, so it's not that much of a problem for me. So I'll continue to work on the roof, and then I'll come back to you in a sec. Okay, so I've started on the side. What I've done, I've used brushes. I used one with a little bit of white spirit on it. I've used one with a little bit of white spirit on it, and I've used one that's predominantly dry. And what I've done, I've just been brushing down on the side of the coach. Then I've used a cotton bud, and I've deliberately attacked the areas where there's no windows. The reason for this is there's nice big areas where there's nothing for the grime to catch. So, whilst not completely tidying them up, I'm getting rid of a lot of the oils, and that gives me a rough idea of what sort of colours I'm going to be looking at. Now what I'm going to do in a second is, using this cotton bud, is I'm just going to, see if it does it, yeah, there you go. I'm just going to slide along the top here, for no other reason than to just clean it up a little bit without taking all of the weathering away. Now I don't know if you can see it, but there's still in the top groove a little bit of grime. That's perfect, that's what I want. So I now have a nice area that I can now start working on the windows. So let's start working on those window areas. Now, once again, I'm just gonna brush down. It's one of those things where I'm obviously going for a slightly grimy, or I guess very grimy look, but it is just a case of repetition until you're happy with the look. Now, like I say, these go through the coach wash. Yes, they're nice and clean, but if you can work away at these, and as I say, you can switch between brush, cotton bud, and because you've already done those middle sections, if you get grime on there, it's okay. You can go over with a cotton bud again, or you can just use the brush. They're already pretty clean, so just quickly brushing them isn't a bad thing. And you might get a little bit more coming up the top bit there. Absolutely fine. All of this stuff is workable. None of it has dried. You are still absolutely fine going through and adjusting as you see fit. So I'm going to work on this, and we'll be back in a sec. I've gone over this with the cotton buds, brush, a little bit of white spirit. What I've done is the bit that I've already said about, where I'm going in between all of the windows, cleaning those up. Don't need them to be perfect, I just need them to be cleaner than in between the windows. And then underneath each, I've done that little run along the top there. I'm going to do it again because it can get a little bit dirty. This can still be filthy if you wanted to. I like to clean it up because otherwise when you're doing the windows you get a bit too much above the windows. And then you can see there's lots of grime. The best area on these for dirt and grime to collect is around the doors. You've got the door here, you've got the door handle, you've got the door crevice opening that it doesn't open on this model, but you've also got the bash buttons. I don't know what the technical name is, but basically these are the buttons that when the doors fly open, they hit like a little rubber stopper rather than smashing into the side of the window. And these are great for collecting dirt. So as you can see, I've gone down, and all it does is we've got some nice grime underneath the windows, we've got some nice clear areas in between, so it's got that nice difference in textures. You've got a nice streak going down from these particular areas. These are the areas I pay most attention to when I'm doing the weathering. So you've got a nice bit of grime there, grime, grime, grime. Then sort of clean. Then there's another one here, and it goes down again. And this shows up really well because it's not blue, this is white, so it comes across even more grimy and dirty, which I really like. All the grime's in the door covers. There's a bit of grime underneath every window. It doesn't have to be loads, but there's enough to sort of cause you to sort of turn your head and go, ooh, that's a bit dark and dirty. So let's turn it over to give you a little comparison of how it looks on the other side. So there you go. So that's what we've worked with from there. So I'm going to go away. I'm going to use exactly the same methods on the other unit of this. I'm going to do all of this, and I'm going to come back and show you the fronts because that's a little bit different, because obviously that is a different area. It's a very different color from the blue, the white and the red. You've got that yellow, so it can sometimes, you need to be careful. Then we'll do all the windows, and then we'll come back and do the bubble car. Okay, right. This is done. We've done the roof. We've brought some of that down. I could possibly do a little bit more on the roof, to be honest. It's looking a little bit too grimy, so I might attack that in a second. But we've done the sides. We've got the grime in the doorways. I've cleaned the windows. All I did with that is I use a clean cotton bud. The first thing I do is I go in all the top little bits and I just twist it round, because you're still going to get dirt and grime in the corners of the windows. And then I use the other end of the cotton bud to do the actual windows and give them a quick polish, because they are relatively clean. The kind of grime and dirt that you're going to get on the windows is from your airbrush weathering. And then I've also done the end. The end is different on every loco depending on what's on there. This is a fairly blank end to a certain degree. So all I do is I use the brush or cotton bud or whatever your preference is, and I just go down and stroke it down, making sure that I'm deliberately leaving bits underneath certain areas where it's going to catch. So on here it's the headlights, in this top section here above the windows, and then once again using the cotton bud to polish the windows. The good thing about doing it in this way is that you effectively get all the areas where the windscreen wipers would do, and the bits up in the corners where the windscreen wipers don't reach stay quite dirty, and that's quite a nice little effect. So I'm going to go away, get the other two bits sorted, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so we're all done with the weathering. We've gone through and done all of the oil washes that we need to do on this. Now, you could leave it at this, or you could use the airbrush to add a little bit more dirt and grime to it, and that's something that I think I'm going to do and come back to at a later date. So I'm going to make sure that I film that and upload that as another video. So yeah, I've really enjoyed using this process, and if you have, please let me know down below. If there's a particular method of weathering that you like doing, then also let me know that as well, because it's always really helpful to hear what other people use. Just doing a little bit of a close-up over here, we can see that there's some dirt and grime in the doorways there, but it's not necessarily absolutely caked in filth on the side. However, on the 121 I have gone for a very, very dirty look at doing this, simply because I want this to be almost on the end of its life, and the railway no longer cares about getting this all repaired and clean and everything like that. It runs on the branch line, which is a failing branch line, so it's on its last legs. Let's just have a quick look at this side of it, and we can see that it's very dirty, very grimy, but I really like it. So there you have it, we are all weathered up. So if you've enjoyed this video, please leave a comment down below and let me know. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, then please let me know as well. Make sure that if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and click the little like icon, because that does really help. If you like what I do, then you can support me via Ko-fi or Ko-fi, which is a little bit like Patreon. However, it is a simple process of you can do it as a one-off, or you can do a rolling monthly subscription where you just help support what I do. Other than that, I'll see you guys again soon. I've got the November layout update coming up as well. So thanks very much and enjoy the rest of your day.